She said it on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just made a pot of soup. The same chicken and root vegetable soup I had been making since my son Marcus was 9 years old and had his tonsils out on a cold October morning. I had made it every time someone in that apartment was sick or tired or simply needed something warm to come home to. I had made it the week after Marcus and Brittany moved in as a welcome. I had made it on the night their heat went out in January, and they called me at 11 o'clock because they didn't know where the building's emergency maintenance number was. I always knew. I knew because the building was mine. But on that Tuesday, standing in their kitchen with soup on the stove and my coat still on my arm, Brittany looked up from her phone and said the words as simply as if she were reading a grocery list. "Eleanor, I've been meaning to say this for a while. Marcus and I need our space. I think it's time you found somewhere else to stay when you visit. Maybe a hotel nearby. This arrangement isn't really working for us anymore." She did not look up from her phone when she finished. I stood there for a moment with the ladle still in my hand and the steam rising from the pot I had just stirred. I looked at the window above the sink, my window, the one I had chosen when I approved the renovation of this unit 4 years ago. I looked at the counter where my soup was cooling, in the pot I had brought from my own kitchen because Brittany's pans were too thin. And I thought very clearly and very quietly, all right, let us see where this goes. I set the ladle down. I turned off the stove. I put my coat back on. "I understand," I said. "I'll be in touch." She was already typing on her phone. Megaphone, if this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Linda's Life Diaries. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore. I am 68 years old, and for most of those years, I have been the kind of woman that other people describe as steady. Not glamorous, not loud, steady, the way a load-bearing wall is steady. The kind of presence that holds a structure together without anyone thinking to ask how or why. I was born in a small house in Durham, North Carolina, the second of 4 children. My father, Charles Whitmore, drove a delivery truck for 31 years without missing a single shift. My mother, Odessa, kept a kitchen garden and a set of books for 3 small businesses on our street: the dry cleaner, the barber shop, and the Haitian woman on the corner who sold homemade preserves at the farmer's market on weekends. My mother had a gift for numbers that she had never been encouraged to develop formally, but which she applied with quiet precision to everything she touched. She could look at a receipt and find an error before she had finished putting her glasses on. I inherited that from her. Or perhaps I learned it. With mothers and daughters, it is sometimes impossible to tell the difference. I studied accounting at North Carolina A&T, which in 1978 felt like a slightly practical miracle for a girl whose family had driven a truck and kept other people's books from a kitchen table. I graduated in 3.5 years because I was not interested in taking my time when there was work to be done. I got a job at a small regional bank in Raleigh, spent 6 years learning everything I could about how money moved and where it accumulated and why it left. Then I moved to Charlotte because a larger firm made me a better offer, and because I was 30 years old and had decided that staying comfortable was the same thing as standing still. I met my husband, Jerome Whitmore, at a conference in Atlanta in 1984. He was an architect. He had big hands and a quiet voice, and the particular kind of confidence that does not need to fill a room to be felt. We were married the following year, which everyone said was fast, and which I still believe was simply accurate. When something is right, you do not need to wait in order to be certain. We moved to Charlotte. Jerome built things. I managed money. We were, by any honest measure, well matched. 2 people who understood that the real work was done quietly, that showing off was for people who didn't have enough to do, and that a life built brick by brick was worth more than one constructed all at once. We had 1 son, Marcus Jerome Whitmore, born in 1987, raised in a house where books were expected and dinner was at the table, and you did not leave a room without saying what you meant. He grew into a good young man, mostly. He has his father's hands and my mother's stubbornness, which is an interesting combination. What he did not inherit, or perhaps simply did not keep, I have never been certain which, was the patience to build slowly. Marcus has always wanted things to arrive faster than they reasonably could. This is not a failing in children. It only becomes one when the child is 41 years old and has married a woman who shares the same impulse. Jerome died in 2011. Cancer, which took him in 8 months from diagnosis to the end, quickly enough that I spent most of those 8 months refusing to understand what was happening and then the next several years understanding it all at once. He left me the house we had built together on Meridian Drive, a life insurance policy we had both been disciplined about, and one other thing, the thing that matters to this story. He left me Whitmore Properties, LLC. Jerome had been quiet about his investments the way he was quiet about most things that mattered to him. Not secretive, simply uninterested in discussing what he considered ongoing work rather than finished product. He had been buying small apartment buildings in Charlotte since 1991. Not aggressively. Not in a way that required celebration or announcement. He had done it the way my mother kept books, carefully, precisely, without any particular need for someone else to recognize what he was doing. By the time he died, Whitmore Properties, LLC owned 4 multi-unit residential buildings in Charlotte, totaling 62 apartments. The largest of them was a 6-story building on Caldwell Street with 24 units, 2 commercial spaces on the ground floor, and an underground parking structure that rented separately. I knew about the properties in the way a person knows about things their spouse handles. Generally, not specifically. I knew Jerome owned rental buildings. I knew they required attention and management. I had signed documents when required and asked broad questions when I thought to ask them. What I did not fully know, until I sat down with his attorney and his property manager in the weeks after his funeral with my reading glasses and a legal pad, and the particular clarity that grief sometimes brings, was exactly how much those buildings were worth, and what it meant for me now that they were mine. I remember sitting at that conference table and reading the numbers carefully from left to right the way I had been trained to do. Then I read them again. Then I took off my glasses and looked at the window for a long moment. Then I put my glasses back on and said, "All right, tell me everything." I spent the next 2 years learning the business. Not delegating it, not hiring someone to handle it and sending me a quarterly summary, learning it. I went to every building. I walked every floor. I met every tenant. I reviewed every lease agreement, every maintenance contract, every insurance policy. I fired one property manager who had been overcharging for contractors and keeping the difference, and I hired a woman named Cynthia Webb, who had been managing residential properties for 20 years and who looked at me, at our first meeting, with the particular respect that professionals extend to other professionals who have done their homework. "Most owners don't come in this prepared," Cynthia said at that first meeting. "I haven't been an owner for very long," I said. "I intend to be a good one." I also, in that period, made a decision that Jerome had not made and that I considered carefully before choosing. I restructured the company. I worked with an attorney and a tax professional to establish a holding entity, Meridian Grace Holdings, that sat above Whitmore Properties, LLC in the ownership chain. The purpose was not concealment, not precisely. It was privacy and protection. I had read enough by then to understand that the name attached to a property is not always the name that matters, and that a woman who owned 62 apartments in a mid-sized city did not necessarily need that fact announced on every lease agreement, every notice of rent increase, every maintenance request form. Cynthia Webb's company, Webb Residential Management, was the name tenants saw. The name on the building directory. The name on the repair van. If you received a lease for an apartment in one of my buildings, it was a Webb residential lease. Jerome had made similar choices, though less formally structured. Most of my tenants had no idea who actually owned the buildings where they lived. This was not unusual in property management. It was simply how the business worked. I did not think about it often, except occasionally as a kind of interesting fact I carried with me. That I could walk into any of my buildings and no one would know, that I could ride the elevator in my own 6-story building on Caldwell Street and step off on the 4th floor and knock on the door of apartment 4C and be received as Marcus's mother, a visitor, a woman who had come to bring soup. Which is, in fact, exactly what had been happening. Brittany Holloway Whitmore came into my son's life in 2018, 2 years after he moved to Charlotte for a consulting job that he described with the kind of enthusiasm that made me suspect the actual work was less interesting than the idea of it. They met at a rooftop event. She was in corporate events management, which suited her because Brittany had the gift of making an occasion feel like something was happening even when very little was. She was attractive, well-dressed, quick with a comment, and deeply invested in the appearance of things. How the apartment looked, how events were described, which restaurants were correct, what the impression would be. She was not unkind to me in those early years. I want to be fair. She smiled at the right moments and asked the appropriate questions, and remembered that I preferred my coffee without sugar. She called me Eleanor rather than Mom, which was her choice and which I respected, though I noticed she made it immediately and with some firmness, as if establishing a perimeter. Marcus looked at her the way men look at women, who make them feel like they are living slightly above their natural altitude. I recognized the look. I had seen versions of it before, and I knew it was not a bad thing in itself. People lift each other. The question was always the direction of the lifting, and who was doing most of the work. They married in 2020, a small ceremony during a complicated year. I gave them a generous gift. I said the right things. I smiled in every photograph. In early 2022, they told me they were looking for a new apartment. Something larger, a good building, somewhere with parking because Brittany had just leased a new car. Marcus mentioned Caldwell Street. He had seen the building from outside and liked the look of it. Modern renovation, good light, close to his office. I said nothing about what I knew. I simply said it was a nice part of the city and asked if they'd looked at the available listings. 3 weeks later, they signed a lease for apartment 4C at 840 Caldwell Street. 2 bedrooms, recently updated kitchen, underground parking space included. The lease was a web residential management standard agreement. My signature was nowhere on it. I visited often. Perhaps more often than was strictly conventional for a mother-in-law, but I was intentional about it, not intrusive, simply present. I brought food. I helped when they asked. I babysat their dog, a brown spaniel named Biscuit, when they traveled. I sat in their kitchen and drank coffee, and listened to Brittany describe her events and Marcus describe his consulting projects. And I asked questions and offered the occasional observation that they were free to take or leave. Brittany's tolerance of me followed a rhythm I came to understand fairly well. In the first months after they moved in, she was gracious. She had a new apartment she was proud of, and was in the mood to be pleased with things. Then, as the novelty settled into routine, her patience for my presence shortened in small but legible increments. She began checking her phone when I was speaking. She began responding to my comments with the kind of brief acknowledgement that means heard, not interested, moving on. She began leaving the room at moments that fell just short of rudeness. Not rude enough to address, just enough to be felt. Marcus noticed but did not intervene. This is the part one find most difficult to write. Not because it surprises me, but because I love my son and I know that watching someone you love make a choice you would not make for them is a specific kind of pain that does not get easier with age. He had always been the sort of person who wanted peace more than truth, when the two were in conflict. Jerome and I had talked about this quality in him, gently, with love, hoping it was a phase rather than a character settled into place. Jerome used to say that Marcus was a mediator by instinct, which was a gift when the situation called for mediation and a liability when it called for a position. What it meant, practically, was that when Brittany became less welcoming of my presence, Marcus did not say to Brittany, "That's my mother, and you will treat her with respect." He said instead to me over the phone that Brittany was going through a stressful period at work, that she was a private person, that she really did appreciate me even if she wasn't always great at showing it. I listened. I said I understood. I continued to bring soup. There was a grandchild I should mention here, though not in the way you might expect. Marcus and Brittany did not have children. What they had was Brittany's niece, Cora, who was 9 years old and who stayed with them on periodic weekends when her mother, Brittany's younger sister, Janelle, needed help with childcare. Cora was a slight, watchful child with her aunt's dark eyes and none of her aunt's performance. She said exactly what she meant, and looked at people with the direct attention of someone who had decided that observation was more useful than expression. Cora liked me. She had decided this early and maintained it without apology, which I found touching and quietly energizing. She was there on the Tuesday that Brittany told me to find a hotel. She was in the second bedroom doing homework, and I do not know how much she heard through the closed door. But when I came to say goodbye, quickly, without drama, my coat already on, the door opened and Cora looked at me with those dark eyes and said, "Are you leaving already, Eleanor?" "I am," I said. "Did something happen?" "Nothing I can't handle," I told her. She looked at me for a moment with that particular 9-year-old assessment that sees more than it should and misses nothing. Then she said, "Okay," and hugged me quickly around the middle and went back to her homework. I went to the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. I rode down 6 floors in my own building. In the lobby, the building manager, a young man named Darnell who worked for Web Residential and had been managing 840 Caldwell for 3 years, looked up from the front desk. "Evening, Mrs. Whitmore." "Leaving?" "For now," I said. He held the door. I stepped out onto Caldwell Street, into the November evening, and I stood for a moment on the sidewalk in front of the building I owned. I looked up at the fourth floor, the lit window of apartment 4C. Brittany's silhouette moving in the kitchen. Then I got in my car and drove home to Meridian Drive. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat at my kitchen table. I opened the notebook I keep for property matters, a plain spiral-bound notebook where I make notes that never leave that drawer. And I wrote down the date, the time, and 4 words. It is time now. I want to tell you who I was in the months before that Tuesday, not just who I became after it, because the story only makes sense if you understand how long I had been watching and what I had been watching for. I am a patient woman. I learned this from my father, who drove a truck for 31 years and never once complained about the route. I learned it from my mother, who kept other people's books from a kitchen table and never asked for credit. I learned it from Jerome, who built things slowly and well and trusted that quality would be evident in time. And I learned it from the years after Jerome died, when I sat with attorneys and property managers and financial documents and understood that I was no longer half of something. I was the whole of it, and the whole of it required my full and steady attention. I had watched Brittany for 2 years. Not with suspicion precisely. With the particular alertness of someone who has learned to read a room before deciding whether to speak. I had watched her move through my son's apartment, their life, with the confidence of a woman who has never had to consider where something comes from before she reaches for it. She redecorated twice in the 2 years they had been at Caldwell Street. New furniture, new curtains, a gallery wall of framed prints that she had photographed extensively for her social media accounts. She referred to the apartment as our place in ways that were perfectly ordinary and in ways that, occasionally, were not. Once, and I remember this clearly, she said to a friend on the phone without lowering her voice while I was in the kitchen. It's a great building, honestly. Our landlord basically leaves us alone. I don't even know who owns it, some company, but whoever it is, they're hands off. Which is perfect. I was putting away dishes when she said this. I put away the dishes. I did not make a sound. I had also watched the financial patterns, as I am trained to do. Marcus earned a good salary. Brittany's events business had grown steadily. They lived, by any external measure, comfortably. And yet there was a quality to their spending, a restlessness in it, an escalation, that I recognized from years of watching numbers. New car. Extended vacation. The second round of furniture. The weekend spa trips that Brittany posted about and Marcus mentioned in passing. The conversation I had overheard. Not deliberately, the bathroom wall on Caldwell Street carries sound in ways the renovation had not fully addressed, about a business opportunity Brittany was pursuing, something that required capital, something she was asking Marcus to be more supportive about. I did not know the details. I had not tried to learn them. What I knew was this: the building was mine. The lease was mine. The unit they lived in, the parking space, the hot water that came out of the faucet in Brittany's newly photographed kitchen. All of it connected, ultimately, to a decision I had made or had inherited the right to make. And Brittany had just told me to find a hotel. I called Cynthia Webb that Wednesday morning. Not from my kitchen. I have learned to make certain calls from certain rooms, and the call I was planning was a Meridian Drive study call, not a kitchen call. Cynthia answered on the second ring. Eleanor. Good morning. Good morning, Cynthia. I need to look at some things. Can you send me the current lease file for 840 Caldwell, Unit 4C? A brief pause. Cynthia was professional enough to understand that there was a pause-worthy element to this request, and discreet enough not to ask about it. Of course. I'll have it to you within the hour. Thank you. I also want to schedule a full review of the building, maintenance records, lease renewals coming up in the next 6 months, anything outstanding. Can we do that next week? Certainly. Tuesday. Tuesday is fine. I hung up and sat for a moment at the study desk that had been Jerome's, looking out the window at the backyard where the garden he had planted was dormant now in the November cold. He had put in a Japanese maple near the back fence 22 years ago. It was taller than the fence now, bare-branched and still, waiting for the season to change. I thought about Brittany's face on Tuesday. The phone. The tone. Find somewhere else to stay. Then I thought about what she did not know, had never known, had perhaps never thought to wonder. I thought about the lease in Cynthia's files. The name at the top, Webb Residential Management. The address of record for the building owner, Meridian Grace Holdings, LLC, a post office box in Charlotte, North Carolina. I thought about the conversation she had with her friend on the phone. Whoever it is, they're hands off. Which is perfect. I folded my hands on the desk. I am 68 years old, And I have spent most of those years being the kind of woman people feel comfortable underestimating. I thought, not hands off, Brittany. Just quiet. There is a difference. I did not call Marcus that week. I wanted to, not to tell him what I was thinking, but simply because he is my son, and I missed him in the ordinary way that mothers miss their children regardless of the complications. But I knew that if I called, something in my voice would be different, and Marcus, whatever his limitations, knows my voice well. He would hear it. I waited. I spent Thursday going through the lease file Cynthia had sent. I read it the way I read everything important. Slowly, carefully, more than once. The lease for Unit 4C at 840 Caldwell Street had been signed in March of 2022. Term: 12 months, with automatic monthly renewal after the initial term. Current rent: within the range I had approved for that unit. No lease violations on record. Rent paid on time every month. I noted the renewal structure. Monthly. No automatic long-term extension. I made a note in my notebook. On Friday, I drove to Caldwell Street. Not to the building, not to go in, not to see Marcus or Brittany. I parked across the street and sat for a few minutes looking at the building the way I had sometimes done in the years after Jerome died, when I was still learning what I had inherited and what it meant. 840 Caldwell was a good building. Jerome had bought it in 2003, before the neighborhood was what it was now, for considerably less than it was worth today. He had done a modest renovation, nothing extravagant, just the kind of careful improvements that made a building sound without making it showy. New electrical throughout, updated plumbing, better windows. He had a gift for seeing what a building needed. In 2019, I had authorized a more substantial renovation. New kitchens in 12 of the 24 units, including 4C. New fixtures throughout the common areas. The lobby had been reconfigured so that natural light came through properly. It was a building that had been tended. It showed. I sat in my car and looked at it and thought about how Brittany had photographed her kitchen the week after she moved in. The herringbone tile backsplash, the marble countertops, the light from that specific window. How the photographs had 57 comments from people saying gorgeous and obsessed and goals. How she had tagged the neighborhood, tagged Charlotte, tagged her own events business. She had not tagged the building. She did not know its name except as the name of a management company. I started the car and drove home. That evening my phone rang. Marcus. Hey Mom. Just checking in. Hi sweetheart. How are you? Good good. Busy week. Did you talk to Britt this week? He was asking carefully, which meant Brittany had said something to him. Which meant he knew. I did, I said. We had a brief conversation on Tuesday. Yeah. A pause. She mentioned that she'd said something to you. About, the visits. She did. Mom, she didn't mean it harshly. She's been stressed, and she's working on this project and she needs. Marcus, I said. I'm not upset. Another pause. He was trying to determine whether this was true, or whether it was the version of not upset that means the opposite. You're not. I'm fine, I said. I think Brittany was honest about what she needs, and I appreciate honesty. Okay. He sounded uncertain. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure we were. Everything is fine, I said. Let's plan dinner soon. The three of us somewhere nice. My treat. Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds really good, Mom. We talked for a few more minutes about other things, his project, a trip they were planning, whether Biscuit the dog had recovered from his recent stomach ailment. Normal things. The texture of a relationship continuing. After I hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand. Everything is fine. It was not a lie exactly. Everything was fine. I had not been hurt. I had not been surprised, not truly. I had simply been given the final piece of information I needed to understand what was necessary. Brittany did not know whose building she lived in. Marcus did not know. Nobody who needed to know knew. And I was not going to tell them. Not yet. Not until the time was exactly right. I went to my desk. I opened my notebook. I wrote, call Evelyn Monday. Evelyn Marsh was my attorney. Not the property attorney, my personal attorney, the one who had helped me with the restructuring of Whitmore Properties in 2013, the one who had Jerome's trust in her and had earned mine. She was 62, small, precise, and the most methodical thinker I had ever worked with outside of Jerome himself. I was going to need her. Not yet, but soon. For now, there were things to understand first. Things to verify. Questions I needed to answer before I made a single move that could not be undone. I have learned, in 68 years of managing money and property and the complicated business of being a woman in rooms, where people do not always expect you to be the one holding the deed, that the most powerful thing you can do is nothing, right up until the moment when everything is in place and the only thing left to do is act. I was not there yet, but I had begun. The Tuesday after Brittany told me to find a hotel, I drove to Evelyn Marsh's office on Providence Road. I had not made an appointment. I called ahead from the car, which is how I always handle things I have decided on. I decide first, then I call, because calling before deciding leaves room for someone else's schedule to become the reason something doesn't happen. Evelyn's assistant told me she had 30 minutes between 9:30 and 10. I said 30 minutes was sufficient. Evelyn's office smelled, as it always did, of coffee and old paper, and the particular stillness of a space where careful thinking was the primary occupation. She was at her desk when I came in, reading something in a manila folder, and she looked up with the expression she reserved for me specifically. Not quite a smile, not quite surprise, the expression of a woman who has handled my affairs long enough to know that when I arrive without much notice, the matter is worth her full attention. Eleanor. She closed the folder. Sit down. I sat. I told her everything relevant, in the order it had occurred, without editorializing. I told her about Brittany's comment on the Tuesday. I told her about the lease structure. Monthly renewal after the initial 12 months, which had expired in March. I told her about the renovation I had approved for Unit 4C in 2019, before Marcus and Brittany moved in, and the current market rate for that unit versus the rate they were paying, which Cynthia had confirmed was now approximately $400 per month below what comparable units in the building were commanding. I told her about Marcus and what I knew and didn't know about their financial situation. Evelyn listened without interrupting. She had a yellow legal pad on her desk, and she wrote 3 things on it during the entirety of my account. This is how I know she is paying attention. The fewer notes she takes, the more she is retaining. When I finished, she looked at me over her reading glasses. What are you planning to do? I'm not certain yet, I said. That's partly why I'm here. I want to understand my options before I choose one. Do you want to evict them? The word landed in the room with the weight words have when they are accurate but uncomfortable. I want to understand the situation completely, I said. I want to know what Marcus is actually involved in with this business project of Brittany's. I want to know what their finances look like. And then I want to make a decision that I can live with, that is proportional, and that is honest. Evelyn studied me for a moment. You've been subsidizing their rent. Unintentionally. The rate was set before they moved in. I didn't adjust it. You could have. I could have. I didn't. Why not? I thought about this. Because they were my son's family and it felt like a kindness at the time. And because I thought things might develop differently than they have. Evelyn nodded slowly. All right. Let's talk through what you actually have here. She picked up her pen. The lease is month to month. You have full legal authority to issue a notice of rent adjustment or a notice to vacate, subject to North Carolina statutory notice periods. 60 days for a month-to-month tenancy of this duration. You own the unit free and clear. There's no mortgage, no encumbrance, nothing that constrains your options. I know. What I'm saying is that you have more flexibility here than most property owners. You can move fast or slow. You can do nothing. You can adjust the rent to market rate and see what happens. You can have your property manager issue a formal notice and let them draw their own conclusions. Or you can do what I suspect you're actually considering, which is wait until you have the full picture and then make one decisive move. That last one, I said. Evelyn smiled. Just barely. I thought so. Then the first thing you need is information. Real information, not what Marcus tells you on the phone. She looked at her notes. This business project. Do you know what it is? Brittany mentioned to Marcus. I overheard this, I wasn't attempting to, that it was something requiring capital. An investment. She used the phrase scaling up, which in my experience means spending money before the business has demonstrated it can produce money. And you don't know where the capital is coming from? I don't. Marcus earns well. Brittany's events business has grown, but events management is a thin-margin industry and susceptible to exactly the kind of volatility that makes lenders nervous. If they've taken on debt for this, I don't know who from. Evelyn wrote something on her pad. I have someone I use for financial research. Discreet, thorough, completely legal, public records, business filings, that kind of work. If Brittany has filed anything for a business expansion, incorporated a new entity, applied for a business license, there will be a paper trail. Do you want me to make that call? Yes, I said. And Marcus? Do you want to know his financial picture? I sat with this question for a moment. It is one thing to investigate a daughter-in-law who has told you to find a hotel. It is another to reach into your son's private finances without his knowledge. I am not a person who takes that line lightly. I want to know enough to understand whether he is in trouble, I said finally. Not every detail. But if he is overextended, if someone has gotten him into something, I need to know before I do anything else. Because the decision I make will need to account for him, not just for her. Evelyn nodded. Understood. I'll make it limited. Business filings, any public record of debt instruments. If he's a signatory on anything commercial, it'll surface. I won't go further than that without your instruction. That's fine. I stood. How long? A week. Maybe 10 days. All right. I buttoned my coat. One more thing. I want to look at the renewal terms across all of 840 Caldwell. Not just 4C. All 24 units. Cynthia has the files. I'll have her send them to you as well. Evelyn looked at me. You're thinking about the building comprehensively. I'm always thinking about the building comprehensively, I said. That's what owning it means. I said goodbye and drove back to Meridian Drive. The week that followed had the particular texture of a period of waiting that does not feel like waiting because you have filled it with useful things. I went to church on Sunday, where I have attended the same service for 19 years, and where the pastor, Brother Calvin Hayes, shook my hand at the door and said I was looking well. I had lunch with my oldest friend, Miriam Castleberry, who had known me since we were in our 30s and who understood, without requiring explanation, when I said I was navigating something complicated and was not ready to discuss it in full. Are you all right? Miriam asked. I'm quite all right, I said. Is it Marcus? Partly. She nodded and passed me the bread basket and changed the subject to her granddaughter's school play, which is one of the things I love most about a friendship of 35 years. It knows when to advance and when to step back. I also, during that week, did something I had not done since Jerome died. I walked through every floor of 840 Caldwell Street. I did this as the owner, not as Marcus's mother. I went on a Wednesday afternoon when I knew Marcus would be at his office, and Brittany had an event she was managing across town. I told Darnell at the front desk that I was doing a walk-through inspection. This was true, and also something the building's owner was entitled to do at any time, a fact Darnell understood even if he had never had occasion to see it exercised. He rode the elevator with me to the 6th floor, and we walked down floor by floor. It is a good building. Jerome chose well. The renovation I authorized in 2019 shows. The hallways are clean, the lighting is correct, the common areas have the kind of quiet quality that makes people feel they are somewhere well-tended. 3 tenants stopped to say hello as we passed. One of them, an older man on the 5th floor who had been at 840 Caldwell since Jerome's time, told me the elevator had been a little slow and asked if it could be looked at. I told Darnell to schedule a service call and thanked the man for mentioning it. On the 4th floor, I walked past 4C. The door was closed. There was a small wreath Brittany had put up, seasonal, tasteful, the sort of thing she would photograph for her social accounts. I paused for a moment without stopping. Then I continued to the end of the hall and took the stairwell down. In the lobby, Darnell held the exterior door. Everything look okay, Mrs. Whitmore? Everything looks fine, I said. Get that elevator serviced. Yes, ma'am. I went to my car. I sat for a moment before starting it. I thought about the man on the 5th floor who had been in this building since Jerome's time, paying his rent each month to a company name he probably knew as Webb Residential, and who had no reason to know that the woman who had just walked past his door and listened to his concern about the elevator owned the building and had done so for 12 years. There is something clarifying about invisibility when it is chosen rather than imposed. I had spent much of my life being underestimated by people who assumed that the woman who made the soup and brought the food and sat quietly at the table was not the one making the structural decisions. Jerome had found this mildly exasperating on my behalf. I had found it, on most days, simply useful. People tell you things when they think you're not important. They relax in front of you. They say things on the phone that they would not say if they understood who was in the next room. Whoever it is, they're hands off. Which is perfect. I started the car. Evelyn called me on a Thursday morning, 10 days after our meeting, and asked me to come in that afternoon. Her voice had the quality it gets when she has found something she did not expect. Careful, slightly deliberate, the voice of a woman organizing her words before she uses them. I was there at 2 o'clock. She had a folder on her desk, thicker than I had anticipated. She opened it without preamble. "Let me walk you through this," she said. What she had found was this. Brittany Holloway Whitmore had, in the previous 14 months, incorporated a new business entity, Holloway Event Studio, LLC, which was listed as a commercial real estate and event consulting firm. The description in the incorporation documents was vague in the particular way that descriptions are vague when a business does not yet do what it claims to intend. The registered address was 840 Caldwell Street, Unit 4C, which was the apartment. Holloway Event Studio, LLC had applied for a business line of credit in August of the current year. The application had been submitted to a regional lender. The application listed as collateral, among other assets, a residential lease at 840 Caldwell Street with a stated below-market rent, which the application characterized as evidence of stable, long-term residential commitment, language that is sometimes used to strengthen a credit application by suggesting permanence of address. The application had been partially approved. The line of credit was for $110,000. $42,000 of it had been drawn. I sat with this for a moment. She used the lease as part of the collateral basis, I said. Not as direct collateral. She can't pledge a rental lease as security for a loan. But she included it as evidence of financial stability and low fixed costs. The below-market rent made her fixed expense picture look healthier than it would at market rate. I looked at the document. And Marcus? Is he on this? He's listed as a co-applicant on the line of credit. His income is cited. His signature is on the application. I placed my hands flat on the desk. This is something I do when I need a moment to think, without the thinking showing on my face. Marcus had signed a loan application that cited, as evidence of financial stability, an apartment lease in a building his mother owned. He did not know his mother owned the building. He had signed because Brittany had asked him to, because the rent was low and the building was good, and it made their financial picture look reasonable. He had built a financial argument on a foundation he did not know belonged to me. Is there more? I asked. There is. Evelyn turned a page. The $42,000 that's been drawn from the line of credit, I tracked where it went, insofar as public filings allow. Approximately $18,000 went to vendor deposits. Event equipment, primarily. That tracks with what Brittany's business does. The remaining $24,000 is less clear. There are payments to a company called Prominence Advisory Group, which appears to be a boutique consultancy. I couldn't find much on them. They have a website that looks recent and a business filing in Delaware from about 18 months ago. $11,000 went to them in 3 payments over the past 4 months. I looked at this for a moment. What does Prominence Advisory Group do? According to their website, they provide brand strategy and market positioning for emerging lifestyle businesses. The website has a lot of photographs and very little specific information. I looked at Evelyn over the folder. We had known each other long enough for me to read what her expression was doing without her saying it aloud. You think it's money going nowhere, I said. I think it's money going somewhere that doesn't justify $11,000 in 4 months for a business the size of Brittany's. But I can't tell you more than that from public records. I turned another page in the folder. There was a printout from what appeared to be a social media account. Brittany's professional account, the one for her events business. Several posts from the past few months. A collaboration announcement with a company called Prominence Advisory Group. Several posts featuring Brittany at what appeared to be networking events, described in the captions as industry accelerator programs and founder circles. The photographs were well composed. Brittany looked confident and polished and slightly elevated, the way she always looked when she had decided that something was the next important thing. How many of these events did she attend? I asked. By my count, 12 in the past 4 months. Each had a registration fee listed on the event website, ranging from $300 to $1,200 per event. I closed the folder. I thought about Jerome, who had bought 840 Caldwell Street in 2003 for a number that would seem remarkable now, who had renovated it carefully and held it patiently, and left it to me with the simple expectation that I would continue to do what he had done. Tend it, protect it, make good decisions about it. I thought about Brittany, standing in the kitchen of Unit 4C on a Tuesday evening, not looking up from her phone, telling me to find a hotel. I thought about Marcus, signing a loan application, not knowing that the low rent he had cited as evidence of financial stability was a number his mother had never raised because she had considered it a kindness. I thought about Cora, 9 years old, looking at me with those dark watchful eyes and saying, "Did something happen?" "Evelyn," I said. "I want to issue a notice of rent adjustment for Unit 4C. To current market rate. Effective 60 days from the date of notice, as required by statute. Evelyn looked at me steadily. That would increase their monthly rent by approximately $400. Yes. Which will change their fixed cost picture. Which may affect the credit line they've drawn. Yes. Is that what you want? That is part of what I want, I said. I also want to have a conversation with Marcus. Before the notice is issued, not after. I want him to know not everything, not yet, but enough. I want him to come and talk to me because he wants to, not because he's been served with a notice and has no choice. Evelyn considered this. How are you going to get him there without telling him what you're telling him? I'm going to ask him to lunch. I'm going to tell him I've been thinking about the future. About estate planning. About some decisions I need to make regarding certain assets. And that I'd like his input because he's my son, and these things will affect him eventually. And that's true. Every word of it. I called Marcus on a Friday morning, which is his lighter day at work, the day he is most likely to answer on the first ring and have the mental space to actually listen. He answered on the second ring. Mom. Hey. How are you? I'm well, sweetheart. Are you free for lunch next week? I'd like to catch up properly. Yeah, of course. Tuesday. Tuesday's perfect. I'll make a reservation somewhere nice. Sounds good. Just us or? Just us, I said. A brief pause. He registered this. Okay. Yeah. Looking forward to it. We said our goodbyes. I hung up and sat for a moment at the desk in Jerome's study. Then I called Cynthia Webb. Cynthia. Good morning. I want to talk through the renewal schedule for 840 Caldwell. All units. Can we meet Monday? Of course, Cynthia said. Shall I pull the full building report? Please. And Cynthia, I want to think seriously about a renovation assessment for the common areas on floors 4 through 6. The elevator needs a service call, which I've already requested. But let's look at what else might benefit from attention. I'll have the assessment ready for Monday, Cynthia said. Thank you. I hung up and looked at my notebook. I wrote, Monday, Cynthia. Tuesday, Marcus. Wednesday, Evelyn, prepare notice. Then I looked at what I had written and drew a small, clear box around Tuesday, Marcus. That lunch was the most important of the three. Everything else could wait until he and I had sat across a table from each other, and I had looked my son in the eye and understood how much he knew, how much he had chosen not to know, and how much of himself was still retrievable from the situation he had walked into. I owed him that conversation before I owed anyone else anything. The restaurant I chose for Tuesday was quiet and good. The kind of place where the tables are spaced properly and the background noise does not require you to raise your voice. I had been going there since it opened in 2016, and I know the owner. A woman named Patricia who had started as a line cook in someone else's kitchen and now ran her own place with the particular confidence of someone who has earned every element of what they have. I arrived first and was seated at a corner table. Marcus came in 7 minutes later, slightly wind-disheveled, in the light gray coat he had been wearing for 3 winters and which suited him well. He looked, as he always did, like his father from the outside and like me from the inside. The way he scanned the room before he found me, the way his expression settled once he did. He sat down and ordered water, and looked at the menu the way people look at menus when they are slightly nervous, and using the menu as something to do with their hands. How's Biscuit? I asked. He laughed. Fully recovered. He ate half a sock last week, and we had to watch him for 24 hours, but he seems fine. Good. I set my menu down. How's Brittany? Good. Busy. She's got 2 big events back-to-back in December. And the studio expansion she's been working on? The new business project. He looked up. I watched his face arrange itself into the particular expression he has used since he was 14. The expression that means I'm deciding what to tell you. It's coming along, he said carefully. She's been building out the consulting side of things. It's a lot of work, but she's committed to it. I'm sure she is. I picked up my water glass. Marcus, I want to have an honest conversation with you today. I want you to know that before we start. His expression shifted slightly. Okay. I'm going to be 69 in March, I said. Your father has been gone for 12 years. I have been managing certain things in his absence that I have not discussed with you in as much detail as I should have, and I want to begin correcting that. He was listening now. The menu was forgotten. When your father died, I inherited several things from him beyond the house. Investments. Assets. I spent 2 years learning those assets, and I have been managing them since. They are in good shape. They will matter to you eventually, which is why I want you to understand them. Mom. He leaned forward slightly. What are you talking about? Are you sick? Is something? I'm not sick, I said. I'm well. This is not a conversation about illness. It's a conversation about clarity. I want to be clear with you about certain things while I am well and thinking clearly and able to have the conversation properly. He sat back. Okay. Your father invested in real estate during his working years. You knew this in general terms. What you may not know is the specifics. I looked at him directly. He owned residential properties in Charlotte. Several buildings. I have been the owner of those properties since his death. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I knew Dad had some rental properties. He had several buildings. I have added nothing. I have simply continued to manage what he left. Those buildings are part of what I want you to understand, because they are part of what will eventually be part of your life. The waiter came. We ordered. When he left, Marcus looked at me with the particular expression of a man who is beginning to understand that a conversation is larger than he had expected. Which buildings? He asked. I looked at my son across the table. I had been holding this moment for 10 days, had been walking toward it, in some ways for much longer. The question now was not whether to tell him but how much to tell him, and in what order, and whether this lunch was the moment for the whole truth or the moment for the first true thing, which is not the same. I thought about Jerome, who always said that the way you deliver information is as important as the information itself. The message and the method are one thing, he used to tell his architecture clients. You can't separate the building from the way you approach it. A few different locations, I said. I want to go through the portfolio with you properly, with Evelyn present, so you have the full picture rather than pieces of it. I'd like to schedule that meeting soon. Of course. Yeah, absolutely. But Marcus. I set down my fork. Before that meeting, I want to ask you something and I want you to answer me honestly. He looked at me. Okay. Brittany's business expansion. The consulting venture. Has she taken on debt to fund it? The pause before he answered was a fraction of a second too long. She's got a line of credit, he said. For the business. It's reasonable. It's for equipment, some marketing, getting the consultancy side properly set up. Are you on that line of credit? Another pause. I co-signed. It's secured by our income. It's manageable. How much has been drawn? He looked at his plate. I don't. Britt handles the financial day-to-day on the business side. I know we drew some to get started. I looked at my son. He was 41 years old, and he was looking at his plate the way he looked at his plate when he was 9 years old and had broken a window with a baseball and hadn't told me. Marcus, I said. I'm not asking to be difficult. I'm asking because I love you and because I am about to make some decisions about my assets that will affect your life, and I need to make those decisions with correct information. Do you understand? He looked up. Yeah, I understand. Is there anything you want to tell me? The silence that followed was not the silence of a man who has nothing to say. It was the silence of a man deciding whether to say it. He said, I think Britt might be in a little over her head with some of the consultants she's brought on. I don't know the details. I've been trying to trust her judgment on the business side because it's her vision. But there's one company she's been working with that I'm not sure about. Prominence something. I asked her about it, and she said it was industry-specific, and I wouldn't understand the model. You wouldn't understand the model. I thought about $11,000 in 4 months to a company with a recent website and a Delaware incorporation, and a lot of photographs. Thank you for telling me, I said. Mom. He looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the expression he had at 18 when he came home from a party and something had gone wrong, and he wasn't sure whether to tell me or carry it himself. Is everything okay? With us? With you and me? Yes, I said. And this, unlike certain other things I had said in recent weeks, was true without qualification. You and I are fine, Marcus. We are always going to be fine. What I'm asking you to do is trust me the way I am trusting you right now, and be honest with me as things develop. Can you do that? Yeah, he said. Yeah, I can. Good. I picked up my fork. Now tell me about this sock biscuit 8. He laughed, a real laugh, the tension breaking, and we finished lunch talking about ordinary things. But something had shifted in the room. Something had been acknowledged without being fully named. He knew I was moving toward something. I knew he was aware that I was moving toward something. And between that knowledge and the full truth, there was still a distance neither of us had crossed. But the conversation had begun. Wednesday morning I was at Evelyn's office by 9. Issue the notice, I said. Evelyn looked at me steadily. You had your lunch with Marcus. I did. How was it? He's a good man who has made some choices out of loyalty to the wrong things, I said. He needs the situation to change in order for him to choose differently. The notice is part of that. Eleanor. Evelyn set down her pen. Once this notice goes out, it cannot be undone without it looking like something. If you issue it and then retract it, they will wonder why the owner of the building changed their mind. If the owner changes their mind, that creates questions about who the owner is and what the owner knows. I'm not going to retract it, I said. The rent adjustment is legitimate, and it is due. I should have raised it at the 12-month mark. I didn't for reasons that were personal rather than business. Now I am correcting that. And if they can't afford the increase? Then they will have a decision to make. And that decision will tell me something I need to know. Evelyn picked up her pen again. 60 days from issuance. Yes. I'll have Cynthia issue it through Web Residential. No indication of why the adjustment is occurring beyond standard language about market rate alignment. Yes. Timeline. The notice goes out this week. In 60 days the new rate applies. Where are you by then? I thought about this. By then, I will have had the full meeting with Marcus and Evelyn, the estate meeting I told him about at lunch. By then, I will have a complete picture of what Brittany's business situation actually is, which Cynthia's colleague is still looking into. And by then, Marcus will have had 60 days in which to either talk to me honestly about what's happening or to continue not talking to me honestly, which will itself tell me something. And at the end of 60 days? At the end of 60 days, I said, I will know exactly what I am dealing with, and I will make the next decision from a position of complete information. Evelyn wrote something. Then she looked up. You're going to tell him, aren't you? That you own the building. Eventually, I said. Yes. When? I thought about Marcus's face at lunch. The plate, the baseball and the window. When he has shown me that he is ready to hear it, I said. Not before. The notice went out on Friday. A standard Web Residential document, professional and impersonal, citing market rate adjustment language that my property attorney had reviewed and approved. It went to Unit 4C at 840, Caldwell Street, along with 9 other units in the building where rents had not been adjusted in the prior 12 months. This was important. The notice to 4C was not singular, not targeted, not identifiable as anything other than what it formally was, a building-wide adjustment by a management company doing what management companies do. I knew about the notice because I was the owner. Marcus and Brittany knew about it because they were tenants. I received an email from Cynthia on Monday morning confirming that all notices had been delivered and acknowledged. Unit 4C tenant, M. Whitmore, had received and signed the acknowledgement form on Saturday. Marcus had not called me. I waited. He called on Monday evening. Mom. His voice was controlled in the way voices are controlled when a person has decided not to lead with their actual feeling. Did you know that our building is raising the rent? I let a small, genuine pause happen. I hadn't heard, I said. Is it a large increase? It's $400 a month. That's significant. Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. It's a Web Residential thing. The management company. They send a notice to a bunch of units, not just ours. 60 days. Are you able to manage it? Another pause, longer this time. I think so. I'm going to have to look at some things. Marcus, I said. If the timing is difficult, given Brittany's business investment, I want you to know that I'm available if you need to talk through the finances. Not to interfere. Just to listen. I know, Mom. His voice had something in it I hadn't heard in a while. Something softer, something almost young. I know. I might take you up on that. Any time, I said. We talked a little longer and then said goodnight. I sat at Jerome's desk for a while after. I thought about Brittany receiving that notice. I thought about her reading it and calculating and understanding that the fixed cost she had listed on a loan application as evidence of stability was no longer fixed. I thought about Prominence Advisory Group and $11,000 and a website full of photographs. I thought about Cora, who would be back at the apartment next weekend, doing homework in the second bedroom with her dark, watchful eyes and her habit of asking exactly the right question. I opened my notebook. I wrote 3 words below everything else I had written. Now we wait. The waiting had a texture to it that I recognized from the years after Jerome died, when I was learning what I had inherited and what shape the future was going to take. It was not passive waiting. It was the waiting of someone who has laid a table and now allows the meal to proceed at its own pace. Cynthia's colleague completed her research on the 3rd week. She delivered a report, thorough, public record sourced, careful, that told me what I had suspected but had not confirmed. Prominence Advisory Group was not a fraud, exactly. It was something more mundane and in some ways more dispiriting. It was a business coaching enterprise aimed at aspirational entrepreneurs, structured as an accelerator ecosystem with membership tiers, networking events, brand coaching sessions, and the particular promise of connections and visibility that appeals to people who have talent and drive and who have not yet found the patient mentors who would tell them to slow down. The events Brittany had been attending, 12 of them in 4 months, at fees ranging from $300 to $1,200, were the primary product. The $11,000 she had paid to Prominence Advisory Group was for a founding membership tier that promised priority access to investor introductions and curated industry partnerships. There was nothing illegal about it. It was simply money spent in the direction of a very particular promise, the kind of promise that requires constant reinvestment to maintain the hope that the investment has been worthwhile. I read the report twice. Then I set it down and thought about Brittany. Not with contempt, I want to be honest about this, but with the specific sadness that comes from watching someone spend real resources chasing a version of success that has been packaged and sold to them by people who know exactly which hope to target. She was not stupid. She was ambitious, and she was being sold something that spoke directly to her ambition. This happens to smart people regularly. It had happened in less visible ways to plenty of people I had known over 68 years. What made it relevant to me was this: $42,000 drawn on a line of credit that was partially based on a lease in a building I owned. $11,000 of that to a coaching enterprise. 12 event fees, equipment deposits, and a business, Holloway Event Studio LLC, that was not yet generating the revenue that would justify any of it. Marcus had said he would have to look at some things. He had said the $400 increase was going to require adjustments. I called Evelyn. I have the research report, I said. I want to schedule the estate meeting with Marcus. Soon. How soon? 2 weeks. Can you clear your schedule for a 2-hour block? I can make that work. Where do you want to hold it? Here, I said. At the house. Jerome's study. A brief pause. You're sure? I'm sure. It's time for him to be in this room and understand what it contains. I called Marcus the next morning and asked him to come to Meridian Drive on the following Saturday for lunch and a conversation I had been intending to have with him about the estate. Should Brittany come? He asked. Not for this one, I said. This is between you and me first. You can share it with her afterward. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, Mom. Is Saturday good? Saturday's good. 1 o'clock. I'll make lunch. I made the same chicken and root vegetable soup I had made the Tuesday Brittany told me to find a hotel. This was not accidental. I am not a woman who does things accidentally. Marcus arrived at 1. He came through the front door the way he always does at Meridian Drive. The particular ease of someone returning to a place that has been there since childhood, the shoulders dropping slightly as he stepped inside. He smelled the soup before he took his coat off. You made the soup, he said. I did. He sat at the kitchen table while I served it. We ate for a little while in the comfortable silence that families have at tables where silence is understood to be companionable rather than hostile. Then I told him we'd have coffee in the study. He followed me in. He stopped in the doorway for a moment, the way people stop at the threshold of rooms that mean something to them. Jerome's study had not changed significantly since Jerome died. I had not preserved it as a shrine. I used it regularly, it was a working room. But I had not erased it either. Jerome's bookshelves still held his architecture books, his engineering texts, his biography collection. His drafting table, which he had never gotten rid of even when he moved to computer-aided design, stood against the wall. Marcus looked at it. I haven't been in here in a while, he said. I know. Sit down. He sat in the chair across from the desk. I sat behind the desk, which is something I had chosen deliberately. Not to be authoritative, simply because it was where I worked, and this was a working conversation. I want to tell you about the properties, I said. All of them. And then I want to tell you something specific. I walked him through it carefully. For buildings. Total units. The holding structure, Meridian Grace Holdings, LLC, the name that appeared on no lease but held everything above it. The current market value of the portfolio, which I had asked my property appraiser to estimate the previous month. The annual net income. Marcus listened without interrupting. He is good at this, better than he is given credit for. He held his coffee cup in both hands, and he listened, and I watched his face process things. When I finished the general overview, he said, Dad built all of this? He began it. I have continued it. I didn't know it was this. He looked for the word. This substantial. I know. I should have been clearer with you earlier. No, I mean, he shook his head. Mom, I knew Dad had some properties, but this is, he looked at me. This is a real estate portfolio. Yes. You've been managing a real estate portfolio for 12 years. Yes. By yourself. With excellent help, I said. Cynthia Webb manages the properties day to day. Evelyn Marsh is my attorney. I have a good accountant and a property appraiser I trust. But the decisions are mine. He looked at me for a long moment. I think he was recalibrating something. The version of me he carried in his head adjusting itself to account for information that had always been true but had never been fully visible. Okay, he said. Okay. What's the specific thing you wanted to tell me? I looked at my son across Jerome's desk. This was the moment. One of the buildings in the portfolio, I said, is at 840 Caldwell Street in Charlotte. The silence that followed was 4 seconds long. I counted. Then Marcus put his coffee cup down on the edge of the desk, very carefully, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not hurt, not shock, but something that contained elements of all three, and was not quite any of them. 840 Caldwell, he said. Yes. He was quiet for another moment. That's our building. Yes. That's where Brittany and I live. Yes. You own it. Since your father bought it in 2003. I have owned it since 2011. He looked at Jerome's bookshelf. At the drafting table. Back at me. You own the building we live in. Yes, Marcus. For how long have you known that we live there? Since before you signed the lease. He stood up. Not in anger. He walked to the window and stood with his back to me for a moment, looking at the dormant garden and the Japanese maple that was taller than the fence. I let him stand there. I did not fill the silence. After a while, he turned around. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to understand who you were becoming before I introduced a complication that would change how you saw your own life. And because I wanted to see. I stopped. I chose the next words carefully. I wanted to see what you would do when you had the freedom to be yourselves, without knowing I was nearby. And what did we do? I looked at him without flinching. Brittany asked me to find a hotel. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were bright. Mom, I'm not telling you this to wound you, I said. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand the full picture. The rent notice that went out 2 weeks ago, the increase to market rate, that came from me through Cynthia, as it should have. I should have adjusted it at the 12-month mark. I didn't for personal reasons. I am correcting that now. He came back and sat down. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands for a moment. Then he looked up. The loan application, he said quietly. I waited. Brittany listed the rent, the low rent, as part of our financial picture for the line of credit. She said it was evidence of stability. Low fixed costs. He looked at me. She didn't know. No, she didn't know. But that means the application. Marcus. I leaned forward. I'm not here to tell you there's a legal problem with the application. There isn't, not in a simple sense. Brittany listed accurate information. The rent was what it was. She didn't misrepresent it. But I want you to understand what the actual picture looks like, because you need that information to make good decisions going forward. He was quiet for a long moment. What do you know about Prominence Advisory Group? He asked. I looked at him steadily. I know what's publicly available. He nodded slowly. She's put a lot of money into them. She says they're going to connect her with investors. Every month there's another event, another session, another reason the right introduction is just around the corner. He shook his head. I've been trying to trust her judgment. But I can see, he stopped. I can see it's not going where she thinks it's going. Have you talked to her about it? I've tried. She says I don't understand the business model. I thought of those exact words. You wouldn't understand the model. Marcus, I said. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly. Okay. Are you all right? Not financially, though I want to know that too. I mean you. Are you all right? He looked at me for a long moment. The room was very quiet. The garden outside was still. I've been worried, he said. I've been worried for a few months. About the business, about the debt, about, he paused. About whether I made the right calls. About whether I've been present enough to see what was actually happening. You have been present enough, I said. You're here now. His jaw tightened briefly. Why didn't you, when Brittany said that to you about the hotel, why didn't you just tell me? Because I needed to understand the situation fully before I acted. And because I needed you to come to me, not be pushed here by something I revealed. I needed to know whether you would come on your own. You've been waiting to see if I'd figure it out. I've been waiting to see if you'd be honest with me. Which you have been, today, more than I expected." He looked at his father's bookshelf again. At the spine of an architecture text he had probably opened as a child, looking for pictures. "What happens now?" he asked. "That," I said, "depends partly on what you and Brittany decide to do. And partly on what I decide to do. And those are not the same decision, though they will need to be made in some kind of conversation." "Are you going to make us leave?" I looked at my son. I had been asking myself this question for weeks, and I had arrived, by the Saturday of this lunch, at an answer that was not simple but that was true. "No," I said. "Not unless you give me a reason to, and I don't think you're going to give me that reason. What I am going to do is maintain the building as it should be maintained, at correct market rates, and make decisions about it as I make decisions about all of my properties, based on what is right and what is sound. And Brittany," I looked at him carefully, "that conversation is between the two of you first. She doesn't know about this yet. She's going to," he stopped. Started again. "She's going to be surprised," I said. "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "Marcus." I waited until he was looking at me. "I have loved you every day of your life. I have made decisions about this situation, including keeping this information from you, that I made because I am your mother and I was trying to protect something I thought you needed to find for yourself. I may have been wrong about the timing. I have not been wrong about loving you. Do you understand that?" "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, Mom. I understand that." We sat in Jerome's study for a while longer. The soup was gone. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, the Japanese maple stood bare and patient in the November garden. Before he left, Marcus stood in the doorway of the study the way he had stood when he came in. "Dad knew about all of this," he said. "Not a question. Your father built it." He nodded slowly. "I wish he were here." "So do I," I said. "Every day." He hugged me at the front door, longer than he usually did, the kind of hug that contains more than the hug itself. Then he walked to his car. I stood at the front door and watched him go. Then I went back inside and stood in Jerome's study for a moment, alone, with everything that had just happened settling around me like the quiet after a door has been opened. I opened my notebook. I wrote, "He knows. He is still himself." I closed the notebook. Then I went to make fresh coffee because there was still a great deal to do. Brittany found out on a Wednesday. Not because I told her. Not because Marcus told her, though he would have eventually. We had agreed, at the end of our Saturday conversation, that he would handle that conversation himself, in his own time, in his own way, and that I would not interfere with how he chose to do it. I had given him the information. What he built from it was his. She found out because of Cora. I want to explain this carefully, because Cora did not do anything wrong. She is 9 years old and she saw something and she said what she saw, which is precisely the quality I have always admired in her, and which, in this instance, produced the kind of clarity that adults spend years trying to manufacture through careful planning, and that children deliver in a single sentence without any idea of what they have done. It was the Wednesday after my Saturday with Marcus, 4 days later. Cora was at the apartment for the weekend, staying through Wednesday because Janelle had a work trip. Brittany had taken her to school Monday and Tuesday. On Wednesday afternoon, Cora's school had a half-day, and Marcus was picking her up, and they stopped at the building's front desk because Cora wanted to say hello to Darnell, who she had befriended the way 9-year-olds befriend adults who give them their full attention. Darnell, who had worked at 840 Caldwell for 3 years and who knew me as a regular presence, said hello to Marcus and said hello to Cora, and then, because he had seen me that morning and it was the natural thing to say, said, "Your mom was in earlier, Mr. Whitmore. Looking at the 6th-floor units, I think." Marcus said something neutral. They went upstairs. That evening at dinner, Cora said to Brittany, "Did you know Marcus's mom comes to the building a lot?" Brittany said, "She visits sometimes, yes." Cora said, "No, I mean she comes when you're not here. Darnell says she's here a lot. He talks about her like she's important." Brittany looked at Marcus. Marcus, who had been carrying the weight of what he knew for 4 days, and who had not yet found the exact right moment to begin the conversation, looked back at Brittany. And something in that exchange, something in the particular quality of his silence, told Brittany that there was something she did not know. This is how Marcus described it to me later. He said, "She looked at me and I couldn't pretend anymore. It wasn't the right time and it wasn't the way I would have chosen, but she was looking at me and Cora was right there, and I told her." He told her that evening, after Cora was in bed. He told her everything I had told him in Jerome's study. The portfolio. The building. The years. The lease. He called me the next morning at 7:45. I told her, he said. I know. How did she take it? A pause. She needs time to process. She's not doing well right now. She's angry. At you. At the situation. At me for not telling her sooner. He stopped. At you. I expected that. Mom. His voice was careful. She wants to talk to you. I know. She wants to come over. To your house. She can come, I said. Tell her Saturday. 1 o'clock. And Marcus, come with her. This conversation needs to happen with both of you. Okay. A breath. Mom, she said some things last night that I don't want to repeat. She was upset. She may not be. Marcus, I said. I have been 68 years old for 11 months. I have managed this family's assets through a grief and a restructuring and 12 years of careful work, and I have done it without losing my composure once. I can manage a conversation with Brittany. A short silence. Then, quietly. I know you can. Saturday, I said. 1 o'clock. They arrived at 12:58. I had made coffee and set out the good cups. The ones Odessa had given me when Jerome and I married, white china with a thin blue rim that she had collected from different places over 30 years. I had not made soup. This was intentional. The soup was for restoration. This was a different kind of meeting. I heard the car in the drive and went to the front window. Marcus parked and they sat in the car for a moment before getting out. I could see them in profile. Marcus's hands on the steering wheel. Brittany turned slightly toward him, saying something. Then they got out. Marcus looked tired in the way that people look tired when they have not been sleeping, which I knew because he had called me twice during the week at hours that suggested sleeplessness. Brittany was dressed carefully. Not the way she dressed for events, not the full performance of her professional self, but not carelessly either. She had put thought into what she wore to come to my house, which told me something. It told me she was treating this as a significant encounter, which meant she understood it was one. I opened the door before they knocked. Come in, I said. I made coffee. We went to the sitting room, not Jerome's study, deliberately. The study was for family conversations. This needed to begin somewhere more neutral, somewhere we were all guests of the same space. I poured. Brittany sat with her cup in her lap and her back straight, and her eyes on me with an expression that I recognized from a lifetime of difficult conversations. It was the expression of someone who has prepared what they are going to say and is managing the effort of holding it until the appropriate moment. I decided not to make her wait. Brittany, I said, I imagine you have things you want to say to me. I'd like you to say them. Something shifted in her face, the preparation disrupted by the directness. You've known for years, she said, that we live in your building. You've known since before we moved in. Yes. And you never told us. I did not tell Marcus until last Saturday. I have told you now through Marcus, which was his conversation to have. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her steadily. Because I wanted to understand who you were, and how you treated people, and what kind of family we were going to be, without the weight of what I owned changing how you behaved around me. Her jaw tightened. So you were watching us. I was paying attention. Yes. That's surveillance. That's Brittany. My voice was even. I am an owner of rental property. My tenants live their lives. I do not watch my tenants. What I do is notice what I notice, which is what any person with eyes and a functional mind does when they are in a room. She looked at Marcus. He looked at his coffee. You were there the night of the heat failure, she said, turning back to me. In January. You told us where the maintenance number was. I knew it because I own the building, yes. You were there when the parking structure had the flooding issue. You knew about that before we did. I was informed by my property manager, yes. She sat with this for a moment. I watched her process it. The recontextualization that I had known was coming, the mental replaying of moments with the correct information installed. Every time I had known something. Every time I had been useful. The maintenance number. The parking repair. The elevator service call I had ordered. The rent increase, she said. Yes. That came from you. It came from my property management company, at my instruction. It was a legitimate market rate adjustment that should have been made at the 12-month mark. I delayed it for personal reasons. I have corrected the delay. Personal reasons. She said this in a tone that meant she was deciding what the personal reasons were. Because you are my son's wife and I was trying to be helpful to you both, I said. I should not have let sentiment override sound management practice. I have corrected it. Marcus looked up at this. He looked at me with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite gratitude, and was perhaps the combination of both that you feel when someone tells the truth in a way that is neither cruel nor false. Brittany was quiet for a moment. She looked at her coffee cup. Then she looked at me. "I told you to find a hotel," she said. Her voice was different now, flatter, stripped of the prepared quality. "You did. I didn't know." "No, you didn't. If I had known, I suspect you would have been considerably more careful," I said. "Yes." The word landed quietly in the room. She heard it. She knew exactly what it meant, not as an accusation but as a fact. What you say to people when you believe there are no consequences is different from what you say when you know there are. This is not a character deficiency exclusive to Brittany. It is simply human. The question is what a person does when the consequences become visible. She stopped. Started again. "I have been stressed. With the business. With everything." She looked at Marcus briefly, then back at me. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was trying to establish something. Space. Boundaries. I felt like," she paused. "I felt like I didn't have any room to breathe." "I understand that," I said. And I did. Not completely, not from inside her experience, but well enough. I have lived long enough to understand that people who feel cornered sometimes reach for authority they don't have, and that Brittany reaching for authority in that apartment was a woman who felt she had very little of it anywhere in her life at that particular moment. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "With the building. With us." I set down my coffee cup. "I'm going to continue to own the building and manage it appropriately," I said. "The rent adjustment stands. It is correct, and it is fair to the market. Webb Residential will continue as the managing company. Nothing about the building's operations will change." She nodded slowly. "What changes," I continued, "is that you now have information you did not previously have. You know who owns the building you live in. You know that owner is your mother-in-law. What you choose to do with that information is your decision, yours and Marcus's. She glanced at Marcus. "Are you going to make us leave?" "I am not in the business of removing tenants who pay their rent and maintain the unit and conduct themselves as good residents," I said. "You have done all of those things. But you could." I could. The directness of this sat in the room for a moment. Not a threat, simply a truth. I could, and she now knew I could, and we both understood that this knowledge had changed the shape of the relationship in a way that could not be unchanged. "Brittany," I said, "I want to say something to you directly, and I want you to hear it as directly as I mean it." She looked at me. "I am not your adversary. I have not been your adversary at any point in this. What I have been is a woman paying attention, in the particular way that women who have had to protect what they built learn to pay attention. I watched you handle a difficult year, a business that is harder to build than you anticipated, financial pressure that you have been managing mostly alone, and a marriage that I think has been lonelier than it should have been." I looked at her carefully. I'm not without sympathy for any of that. Something moved across her face. Not the prepared expression. Something underneath it. "The business," she said quietly. "Yes. You know about the business. I know some things about it. The things that are publicly available." She looked at Marcus. He looked back at her, and in that exchange I could see the conversation they had not yet fully had. The one where she told him how frightened she had been, and he told her he had been frightened too, and they discovered they had been frightened of different things and in different directions, and had not known how to find each other in it. "Prominence Advisory Group," I said. "I want to say one thing about them, and then I will not say another thing unless you ask me." She was very still. "You have talent in your industry," I said. "I have watched you work. You have real skill and genuine taste, and the ability to make people feel that an occasion is more than it is, which is a rare gift. You do not need a company that is selling you introductions that haven't materialized in 4 months and events that cost you money you are currently borrowing to attend. You need a mentor who knows your industry, who is interested in your actual business, and who will tell you the truth about what is working and what isn't." She was quiet for a long time. "How do you know it's not working?" she asked. "Because you're here," I said. "And you're scared. And you haven't told Marcus how scared you are, which means you've been carrying it alone. People don't carry things alone when things are going well." A breath. Something broke open slightly, not collapsed, not dissolved, but opened. The way a hand opens when it has been holding something too tightly. "I thought it was going to be so clear," she said. "I had a plan. I had it all worked out. The consulting side, the investor introductions, it was going to be the thing that made us, that made me." She stopped. Her eyes were bright. I didn't want to keep doing events for other people's occasions forever. I wanted to build something of my own. That is a worthy thing to want, I said. But I went about it wrong. You went about some of it wrong, I said. That is correctable. She looked at me. Are you offering to help me? I considered this carefully. Not the answer, which I already knew, but how to give it in a way that was honest about what it was and what it wasn't. I am offering to have a conversation, I said. About your business. About what you have, what you've spent, what the realistic path forward looks like, and who you should be talking to who knows your industry from the inside. I have been in the business of managing assets for a long time. I know some things about the difference between money well spent and money spent hopefully. I also know some people. I looked at her steadily. Patricia, who owns the restaurant where Marcus and I had lunch last week. She built her business from nothing. She knows events. She has mentored 3 young women in the hospitality industry in the past 5 years. I think you should meet her. Brittany was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Why would you do that? After everything. Because you are my son's wife, I said. And because you love him, even when you both have been too frightened to show it to each other properly. And because the woman who can make a room full of strangers feel like a family at a table is not a woman who should be paying $11,000 to a company that has not delivered a single investor introduction in 4 months. She looked at Marcus. He reached across the space between them and covered her hand with his. She let him. We talked for another 2 hours. Not about the building, not primarily. About the business, yes, and about the finances, and about the specific steps that needed to happen with the line of credit and the prominence relationship and the reassessment of Holloway Event Studio going forward. But also about other things. About Marcus's father, who had built 840 Caldwell Street the year Marcus turned 16 and had never once mentioned it at the dinner table. About my mother, who had kept other people's books from a kitchen table in Durham, and who had passed to me a specific understanding of how money works, and what it means when it moves carefully rather than desperately. About what it means to want something so much that you stop being able to see clearly what it's costing you, and what it means to have someone in your life who can see it for you, if you let them. Brittany cried once, not dramatically, not in the performed way, but in the way people cry when something that has been pressurized finally has a small release valve. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then came back to the conversation. I handed her a tissue from the box on the side table and said nothing. Marcus held her hand through most of the second hour. Before they left, Brittany stood in the front hallway with her coat on and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not the controlled, managing expression, not the phone-in-hand expression, not the expression of a woman establishing perimeters. Something younger, something less certain and more real. I need to ask you something, she said. Go ahead. When I told you to find a hotel, she stopped. When I said that, did you? She was trying to find the question. Did you decide then? What you were going to do? I thought about the Tuesday. The soup. The ladle. The window above the sink that I had chosen when I approved the renovation of that unit. The notepad at Jerome's desk. The 4 words I had written. It is time now. I made a decision, I said. Yes. What decision? That it was time to stop managing from a distance, I said. That the things I had been watching and waiting to understand were now understood. And that if I didn't begin, something would be lost that couldn't be recovered. She considered this. And what was going to be lost? I looked at my son, standing behind his wife in the hallway of the house his father built, with Jerome's hands and my stubbornness and the particular exhaustion of a man who has been trying to hold something together that was more complicated than he knew. Him, I said. Or rather, the version of him that I know is there. Brittany turned and looked at Marcus. He looked back at her. Then she turned back to me. I'm sorry, she said. About the hotel. About the way she took a breath. About all of it. I know, I said. I meant it. I'm not, she looked for the right words. I'm not performing it. I know that too. She nodded. She looked at me for another moment with those dark eyes that were her own, that were not performing anything, that were simply present. Then she hugged me. It was brief and slightly startled. Mine was the startled part, hers was the decisive part. And then it was over and she stepped back and put her coat collar right and Marcus made a sound that was not quite a laugh and was clearly relief. I held the door. They went to the car together. I watched them from the doorway until the car turned at the end of Meridian Drive and disappeared. Then I went inside and stood in the front hallway for a moment in the particular quiet of a house after visitors have left, when the warmth of their presence is still present, but the presence itself is gone. I thought about Jerome. I thought about 840 Caldwell Street, standing exactly where it stood on a Wednesday afternoon in November, 24 apartments in 6 floors, 62 years of a man's careful investing, and 12 years of a woman's careful management. Hot water coming out of the faucets, and the elevator recently serviced, and a wreath on the door of Unit 4C that would come down after the season changed. I thought about what it is to hold something for a long time. Not grip it, hold it. The way you hold something valuable that belongs partly to you and partly to time, and partly to the people whose lives move through it while you tend it from the outside. I went to Jerome's study. I sat at the desk. I opened the notebook. I looked at everything I had written over the past weeks. The dates. The notes. The 4 words I had written the Tuesday Brittany told me to find a hotel. It is time now. Below all of it, I wrote the date. Then I wrote 2 sentences. He is still himself. So am I. I closed the notebook and put it in the drawer. The meeting with Patricia happened 3 weeks later. I arranged it simply, coffee, the restaurant before it opened on a Monday morning, just the 3 of us. I did not structure it, did not prepare an agenda, did not tell Patricia what to say or Brittany what to hear. I introduced them and I poured the coffee, and I sat slightly back from the conversation and let it find its own shape. Patricia was, as I knew she would be, direct and generous in equal measure. She asked good questions. She looked at what Brittany had built, the actual business, the client list, the portfolio of events she had produced in the past 3 years, and said, without any softening, that the foundation was solid and the direction of the past 6 months had been expensive and wrong, and here was why, specifically, and here was what she would do instead. And here were 2 people in Charlotte who worked in adjacent industries and who Brittany should call, not because they were investors but because they were people who understood the actual market. Brittany listened. She took notes. She did not perform confidence, and she did not collapse into uncertainty. She sat across from Patricia with a yellow legal pad, and she wrote down what was worth writing down, and she pushed back, twice, on things she disagreed with. And both times Patricia looked at her with the particular appreciation that professionals feel when someone they are helping demonstrates they have something worth helping. Driving home afterward, I called Cynthia to discuss the 6th floor renovation assessment. Life continued. There is a conversation I had not yet described, which happened in December, which I want to describe now because it belongs to this story in a way that nothing else quite does. Cora came to the apartment for the weekend before Christmas. She was there Friday through Sunday, and on Saturday afternoon Marcus brought her to Meridian Drive because she had decided, with the particular directness of a 9-year-old who has decided something, that she wanted to see my house. She arrived with Marcus and stood in the front hall and looked around with those dark watchful eyes and said, "It's bigger than I thought it would be." "It's the same size it's always been," I said. "Would you like a tour?" She would. I walked her through the house the way I walk through my buildings, carefully, with attention, naming things that are worth naming. The kitchen where I had cooked the soup. The sitting room. Jerome's study, which I showed her through the doorway without going in, because the study is for specific conversations and Cora's visit was not that kind of conversation. The garden through the back window, the Japanese maple bare and patient in the December cold. At the Japanese maple, she pressed her face briefly against the cold glass. "Who planted that?" she asked. "My husband. Marcus's father. 22 years ago." "Is he gone?" "He died 12 years ago." She considered this with the seriousness that children bring to facts about death, not performance, not discomfort, simply acknowledgement. "Does it make you sad?" she asked. "Seeing the tree?" "Sometimes," I said. "And sometimes it makes me glad." "Both at the same time?" "Both at the same time," I said. She nodded, as if this confirmed something she had suspected. We went back to the kitchen where I had made hot chocolate, and she sat at the table with the good mug, white china, blue rim, and drank it slowly and looked at me with those eyes. "Darnell told me something," she said. "What did Darnell tell you?" "He said you've been in that building a long time. He said you know everything about it." "Darnell talks too much," I said without any heat. "He also said you're the reason the elevator got fixed," she said. "And that you noticed the lights in the stairwell on 3 were out before anyone else did. The lights in the stairwell are a safety concern. He said you care about the building." "I do care about the building." She held her mug in both hands and looked at me. "Is it yours?" I looked at this child, 9 years old, watchful, direct, sitting in my kitchen in December with hot chocolate in her grandmother's china, asking the question that adults had been circling for weeks. "Yes," I said. "It's mine." She nodded slowly. "I thought so." She took a sip. "Does Aunt Brittany know?" "She does now." "Was she upset?" "For a while. She's working through it." Cora seemed to find this satisfactory. She looked at the Japanese maple through the kitchen window. You could see the top branches from the kitchen if you looked at the right angle. "My mom says," she said, not looking at me, "that the reason things get complicated in families is because people don't say the true thing until it gets too big to carry. She says you have to say the true thing while it's still small enough to hold." "Your mother is right about that," I said. "You waited a long time." "I did. Was that wrong?" I thought about this, genuinely thought about it, because a 9-year-old who asks a real question deserves a real answer. "I think some of the waiting was right," I said. "I needed to understand things before I could act on them. And I think some of the waiting was me being more patient than the situation required. Both of those things can be true." She considered this seriously. "Okay," she said. We finished the hot chocolate. Before Marcus came to take her back, Cora stood in the front hall with her coat on and said, "Can I come back sometime?" "On my own. Not just when Marcus brings me." "You can come any time," I said. "The door is always open for you." She seemed satisfied with this. She went to the car. I stood at the door until they were gone. In February, Brittany terminated her membership with Prominence Advisory Group. She did it by registered letter, citing non-performance of contracted services, which was both accurate and potentially useful as documentation if the line of credit ever required renegotiation. Patricia had helped her draft it. She also closed 2 of the 3 remaining deposits she had made with event equipment vendors, one of whom returned the deposit in full, one of whom retained half, and one of whom she took to small claims and won. This last part was Brittany's own initiative. I heard about it from Marcus, who told me with the particular pride of a man watching his wife do something he had not expected her to be able to do, which is the best kind of pride. Holloway Event Studio, LLC filed amended articles of incorporation in March, no longer describing itself as a commercial real estate and event consulting firm, but as a boutique event production company specializing in private corporate and social occasions in the Charlotte metropolitan area. Simpler, more accurate, more true. Patricia introduced Brittany to a woman named Constance who had run events for a major Charlotte corporation for 15 years and had recently gone independent. They began a working partnership in April. Not formal, not legally bound, simply 2 women with complementary skills doing complementary work and seeing what grew from it. I watched this from the appropriate distance, which is what I have always done. On a Saturday in May, I drove to 840 Caldwell Street. I parked across the street, the way I had in November, and I sat for a moment looking at the building. The street looked different in May. The trees along Caldwell that had been bare in November were full now, the green particular and vivid in the morning light. The building looked the same as it always looked. Solid, well-tended, the result of careful decisions made over a long time. I crossed the street and went into the lobby. Darnell was not at the front desk. He had a day off. The weekend desk attendant, a young woman named Grace who had started in January, looked up and said good morning. "Good morning," I said. "I'm going to 4. She nodded. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor. It moved smoothly. The service call had been completed in December, and the mechanism had been adjusted. I got off and walked down the hallway. The wreath was gone from the door of Unit 4C. In its place was a small print in a frame, abstract, colorful, the kind of thing Brittany chose. Beside the door on the floor was a pair of Cora's sneakers. She was there for the weekend. I knocked. Footsteps. The door opened. Brittany looked at me across the threshold. She was in weekend clothes, unhurried, relaxed, the way she looked when she was not managing an occasion. She stepped back. "Come in," she said. The apartment smelled of coffee and something baking. The kitchen counter, the marble counter with the herringbone backsplash, had a baking sheet on it. In the second bedroom, I could hear the sound of Cora's voice talking to Biscuit the dog, who had apparently joined the weekend visitation. Marcus came out of the back hallway. "Mom!" He smiled, the full, uncomplicated smile, the one I had been waiting to see again since the Saturday in Jerome's study. "You didn't say you were coming." "I was in the neighborhood," I said. He laughed. He knew, as I knew, and as Brittany knew, and as Darnell at the front desk had probably always known, that I was never simply in the neighborhood. "We're making banana bread," Brittany said from the kitchen. "I'll stay for a piece," I said. I sat at the kitchen table. The table in the apartment I owned, in the kitchen I had approved the renovation of, in the building Jerome had bought the year Marcus turned 16, in the city we had all arrived at from different directions and for different reasons, and which held, now, all the things we had built and maintained and inherited and gotten wrong and were trying to do better. Biscuit emerged from the second bedroom, followed by Cora, who saw me and said, "Eleanor," with the enthusiasm of someone who has not recalibrated their feelings to account for complicated adult situations and is simply glad to see a person they like. "Hello," I said. She came and sat beside me at the table. She looked at the baking sheet. "It's not done yet," she said. "I can wait," I said. The four of us sat in the kitchen of apartment 4C at 840 Caldwell Street on a Saturday morning in May, waiting for the banana bread to finish, while Biscuit made hopeful circles around the table, and the trees along Caldwell Street moved in the spring wind outside the window I had chosen. I want to tell you what I know and have always known about buildings. A building is not simply the structure. It is not the walls or the floors or the fixtures or the lease agreements or the market rate calculations or the renovation assessments. Those things are the building as paperwork, the building as balance sheet, the building as asset. The building itself is what happens inside it. It is the man on the 5th floor who has lived there since Jerome's time and who mentioned the elevator and trusted that someone was listening. It is Darnell at the front desk, who knows all the residents by name and who told a 9-year-old girl that the woman who walked through the lobby knew everything about the building. It is 24 apartments holding 24 configurations of private life, each of them paying rent to a company called Webb Residential, most of them never knowing or needing to know who owns the thing that holds them. It is the 4th floor, Unit 4C, with the framed print beside the door and the marble counter and the herringbone backsplash, and the specific quality of light from the window I chose in 2019 because I stood in the empty room during the renovation walkthrough and understood that the light from that window, in the afternoon, would be the particular quality of light that made a kitchen feel like a place where things could be worked out. I did not know when I approved that renovation that my son would one day live in that kitchen. I did not know that his wife would photograph it for her social accounts, or that a 9-year-old girl would do her homework in the second bedroom on weekends, or that I would sit at that kitchen table on a Saturday in May waiting for banana bread. You cannot know when you tend something for a long time exactly what it is you are tending it for. This is not a reason to tend it carelessly. It is a reason to tend it with the full attention of someone who understands that what a thing becomes is determined, to a significant degree, by who is responsible for it and whether that person shows up. Jerome showed up for 20 years. I have shown up for 12. I intend to keep showing up. There is one more thing, which I have not mentioned until now, which happened in June and which I include here, because it belongs to the story in the way that things belong to a story when they are not the point, but are part of the truth. My niece, Deja, my sister's daughter, who lives in Atlanta and who has been working in property management for 5 years, and who is 29 and serious and precise in the way that people are precise when they have been paying close attention to something they love, called me in June to say that she was thinking about buying her first property. A small multi-unit building. She had the down payment. She had done her research. She wanted to talk it through. We talked for 3 hours. At the end, she said, "Did Uncle Jerome teach you all of this?" "He taught me the beginning of it," I said. "I taught myself the rest." "How?" "I paid attention," I said. "I asked good questions. I made some mistakes. I corrected them." A pause. "Were you ever scared?" I thought about the conference table after Jerome's funeral. The numbers I had read from left to right, and then read again. The window I had looked at for a long moment before putting my glasses back on and saying, "All right. Tell me everything." "At the beginning," I said. "And sometimes in the middle. Not now." "What changed?" "I thought about this. I stopped waiting to feel certain," I said. "I started acting on what I knew, and trusting that the rest would become clear. It generally does if you're paying attention." Deja was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Call me when you've found the building," I said. "I want to hear about it." She called me in August. She had found a building. I drove to Atlanta to look at it with her. Jerome's Japanese maple is taller every year. I have never trimmed it. I see no reason to. It grows correctly, which is the quality I most admired in Jerome, and which I find reflected, still, in the things he planted. I tend what he left me. I make good decisions about it. I make some decisions that are based on something other than pure sound judgment. And when I notice this, I correct it, because the correction is always available, and the moment you understand what needs to be corrected is always the right moment to begin. I am 68 years old. I have been managing a real estate portfolio for 12 years, a classroom for 38 years before that, and a family for 41 years in the middle of both, none of which is the kind of management that appears in any official document or carries any formal title. I am the kind of woman people describe as steady. I have decided at 68 that this is not a limitation. It is a strategy. The load-bearing wall does not announce itself. It does not require recognition to hold the structure together. It simply holds and holds and holds. And when the time comes, when something needs to change, when the holding is no longer sufficient, when what is required is not silence but speech, not patience but action, it moves. Quietly. Precisely. In a way that cannot be undone. And the building stands. Megaphone, thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated. And we tell those stories here.